Some places hold sounds that were never meant to be heard. Beacon Rock rises 848 feet above the north bank of the Columbia River, approximately 35 miles east of Portland, Oregon. It is the core of an ancient volcano. The hardite plug left behind after softer surrounding rock eroded over tens of thousands of years. To geologists, it represents one of the finest examples of a volcanic neck in North America. To the Klickitat and Chinook peoples who lived along these waters for millennia, it was simply called Che-che-op-tin, a name that translates roughly to the navel of the world. The rock dominates the landscape of Skamania County. Drivers passing along State Route 14 often slow to photograph its sheer basalt walls, which catch morning light in shades of rust and charcoal. A switchback trail, constructed between 1915 and 1918 by a man named Henry Biddle, winds up the southern face. It remains one of the most popular short hikes in the Pacific Northwest, drawing nearly 200,000 visitors annually. But there is a particular spot at the base of Beacon Rock, just off the main trail, where the forest meets the exposed talus slope that has accumulated an unusual history. It is not marked on any park map. Rangers do not mention it during orientation. And yet, since at least 1952, a small but consistent number of visitors have reported the same experience there, a deep rhythmic vibration that seems to come from within the rock itself. The sound has no official name. Those who have heard it describe it simply as the hum. The first documented account comes from a fire lookout named Bernard Ostrowski, who worked the Hamilton Mountain Station during the summer of 1952. In a letter to his sister dated August 14th of that year, Ostrowski described taking his lunch near the base of Beacon Rock on a calm afternoon. He wrote that he heard a low pulse, like a heartbeat underground, and assumed it was equipment from the nearby Bonneville Dam. But when he checked with the Army Corps of Engineers, he was told no machinery had been operating that day. Ostrowski returned to the same spot 3 more times that summer. Each visit, he reported the same sensation, a vibration that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and settle somewhere behind his eyes. By September, he had developed a persistent ringing in his left ear that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He never spoke of it publicly, but his letters, donated to the Skamania County Historical Society in 1989, describe it in clinical detail. The second major incident occurred in 1967, when a group of geology students from Portland State University visited the rock as part of a field study. One of the students, a 23-year-old named Margaret Holm, separated from the group to take photographs near the eastern talus field. According to her field notes, she sat down to rest and almost immediately felt a pressure in the air, like standing too close to a subwoofer. She described the sensation as rhythmic, approximately 1 pulse every 4 seconds, and noted that it seemed to intensify when she placed her hand against the rock. Holm reported the experience to her professor, Dr. Edwin Marsh, who dismissed it as auditory fatigue from the long drive. But 3 other students in the group later admitted they had felt something similar, though none had mentioned it at the time. Margaret Holm developed tinnitus within the week. She withdrew from the geology program the following semester. In 1974, the United States Geological Survey commissioned a detailed acoustic and seismic study of Beacon Rock as part of a broader volcanic hazard assessment for the Columbia River Gorge. The project was led by Dr. Richard Salcedo, a geophysicist based out of the USGS field office in Vancouver, Washington. His team spent 3 weeks conducting ground-penetrating radar scans, seismic refraction tests, and ambient noise recordings at various points around the monolith. The final report, published in 1976, concluded that Beacon Rock was a solid basalt plug with no significant internal voids or fractures. The acoustic environment was described as unremarkable. But Dr. Salcedo's personal field notes, obtained decades later through a Freedom of Information request, tell a different story. On the 11th day of the survey, Salcedo recorded the following entry: anomalous low-frequency reading at eastern base, approximately 7 Hz, pulsing. Does not correlate with any known source. Team reports no audible sound, but Fenton and I both experienced mild vertigo and pressure in the inner ear. The reading was taken at 11:47 in the morning. By noon, the signal had vanished. Salcedo ordered a second sweep of the area, but the equipment registered nothing. 2 days later, a similar reading appeared. Same frequency, same location, same time of day. This time, Salcedo's assistant, a young technician named David Fenton, reported hearing a kind of breathing coming from inside the rock. Fenton requested a transfer off the project the following week. He cited personal reasons. None of these observations appeared in the final published report. When contacted by a journalist in 2003, Dr. Salcedo, then retired and living in Bend, Oregon, declined to comment on the discrepancy. He passed away in 2011. His field notes were discovered in a storage unit by his daughter, who donated them to the Oregon Historical Society. They remain in the archive, but are not included in the USGS's official records. Theories about the hum have circulated quietly among local hiking communities for decades. Some point to the Bonneville Dam, located just 4 miles downriver, suggesting that low-frequency vibrations from its turbines could travel through the bedrock. But engineers at the dam have repeatedly stated that their equipment operates well above the frequency range described by witnesses, and that no vibration would be detectable at that distance without specialized instruments. Others have speculated about volcanic activity. Beacon Rock sits within the Cascade Volcanic Arc, and the region has experienced minor seismic events throughout recorded history. But the rock itself is geologically inert, a remnant of a volcano that last erupted over 50,000 years ago. There is no magma chamber beneath it, no geothermal vent, no plausible mechanism for sustained vibration. A 1991 study by a graduate student at the University of Washington attempted to measure infrasound levels at the site. The student, whose thesis was never completed, recorded 3 days of ambient audio at the eastern base. Her preliminary data showed brief spikes in the 7 to 9 Hz range, frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, but capable of producing physiological effects such as disorientation, nausea, and auditory hallucination. The student abandoned the project after developing severe migraines. Her recordings were never analyzed in full. Park rangers have occasionally acknowledged the phenomenon off the record. A retired ranger named Thomas Kilpatrick, who worked at Beacon Rock State Park from 1984 to 2002, admitted in a 2016 interview that he had received a handful of reports over the years from hikers describing unusual sounds or sensations near the base. He said he always attributed them to wind patterns or fatigue, but when pressed, Kilpatrick admitted that he had once experienced something similar himself, a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He had never filed a report. He said he didn't know what he would have written. Today, Beacon Rock remains one of the most visited landmarks in the Columbia River Gorge. The trail to its summit is well maintained, the views spectacular, the parking lot full on summer weekends. There is no mention of the hum in any official literature, no warning signs, no interpretive plaques. But if you visit the eastern base on a quiet morning, away from the trail, Where the forest gives way to broken stone, you may notice that the birds fall silent, that the air feels heavier than it should, that the rock, despite the cool shade, seems almost warm to the touch. And if you stay long enough, you may begin to feel it. A pressure behind your eyes, a rhythm just below hearing, a pulse that matches nothing in the world around you. Most people leave before it becomes unbearable. A few do not. There is no record of what they heard. The Columbia River does not forgive those who walk against it. The Bonneville Dam stands 40 miles east of Portland, Oregon, straddling the border between Oregon and Washington at one of the narrowest points of the Columbia River Gorge. Completed in 1938 as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal initiative, it was among the first federal dams on the Columbia, a concrete monument to American ambition stretching nearly 2,000 feet across the river. At its peak flow, nearly 150,000 cubic feet of water pass through its spillways every second. The dam transformed the region. It brought electricity to rural communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. It created jobs during the Depression. It also drowned ancient fishing grounds sacred to the Yakima, Warm Springs, Umatilla, and Nez Perce tribes, places where their ancestors had harvested salmon for more than 10,000 years. Celilo Falls, once one of the most significant Native American trading sites on the continent, would disappear beneath the reservoir created by the Dalles Dam just 15 miles upstream in 1957. But in 1953, the Bonneville Dam was still relatively young. The Army Corps of Engineers maintained a constant presence. Technicians, security personnel, maintenance crews, working in shifts around the clock. The waters below the spillway churned with a violence that made the area strictly off-limits to civilians. Warning signs lined both banks. The undertow alone could pull a man under in seconds. It was not a place where anyone walked. The incident occurred on the morning of September 14, 1953. The sky was overcast, the temperature hovering around 58 degrees. 4 men were stationed at the downstream observation platform on the Washington side, a concrete structure used primarily for monitoring fish ladder activity and water levels. Their names, according to declassified personnel records, were Howard Lundquist, age 34, James Okonkwo, age 29, Peter Halverson, age 41, and Arthur Begay, age 37. All were civilian employees of the Army Corps of Engineers. All had worked at the dam for at least 2 years. At approximately 9:15 in the morning, Halverson noticed movement in the water roughly 200 yards downstream from the spillway. He initially assumed it was debris, a log perhaps, or a dead animal caught in the current. But as he watched through binoculars, he realized it was a person, a woman standing upright in the water. She was not swimming. She was not floating. According to Halverson's written statement, she appeared to be walking, her movement slow and deliberate, her body inclined slightly forward as if leaning into a strong wind. The water around her reached approximately to her waist. She was moving upstream, against a current that should have been impossible to resist. Halverson called the others to the platform. All 4 men observed the figure for approximately 3 minutes. She continued upstream, passing directly beneath the observation platform, close enough that they could make out details of her clothing. A long, dark dress, high-collared, with what appeared to be a shawl or cape around her shoulders. Her hair was dark and pinned up. Her face was pale. She did not look up at them. She did not appear to notice them at all. Then, approximately 50 yards upstream from the platform, she was gone. Not submerged, not swept away, simply no longer there. Howard Lundquist was the first to file an official report. He was known among his colleagues as a careful man, methodical, not prone to exaggeration. His statement, submitted that same afternoon, described the figure in clinical terms. Approximate height, estimated age, direction of movement, duration of observation. He noted that all 4 men had witnessed the same event, and that none could offer an explanation. James Okonkwo, in his own statement, added a detail that Lundquist had omitted. He said the woman's dress appeared wet only below the waterline. Above the surface, the fabric looked dry, as if the water simply refused to touch her. Arthur B. Gay, a Navajo man who had grown up near Window Rock, Arizona, declined to provide a written statement. According to personnel notes, he told his supervisor only that he had seen something that should not be spoken about and requested immediate reassignment. His request was granted within the week. Peter Halverson, the oldest of the 4, submitted the most detailed account. He described the woman's gait as unhurried, almost peaceful, and noted that her feet appeared to be touching the riverbed despite the depth of the water. He estimated the current at that location to be moving at approximately 12 miles per hour, strong enough to sweep a grown man off his feet in seconds. She walked like she was crossing a meadow, Halverson wrote, like the river wasn't even there. When asked why he had not attempted to call out to her or alert emergency services, Halverson replied that it had not occurred to him. None of the men had thought to shout or intervene. They had simply watched. The Army Corps of Engineers opened an internal investigation within 48 hours. The case was assigned to a security officer named Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Dietrich, who had previously handled incidents involving unauthorized access to restricted areas and potential espionage concerns during the early Cold War period. Dietrich interviewed all 4 witnesses separately. He reviewed water flow data, tidal charts, and weather conditions for the morning in question. He consulted with engineers about the physical impossibility of what the men described, the force required to walk against the current, the depth of the water at that, location, the absence of any visible support or flotation device. His preliminary report, portions of which were declassified in 2004, concluded that no satisfactory natural explanation could account for the observations. He noted that all 4 men had passed recent psychological evaluations, had no history of substance abuse, and had provided consistent, independent accounts. But the final version of the report, submitted to Corps headquarters in late October 1953, reached a different conclusion. It stated that the witnesses had likely observed an optical illusion caused by atmospheric distortion and water refraction, possibly combined with floating debris that created a humanoid silhouette. The case was closed. Within 30 days of the incident, all 4 witnesses had been transferred. Lundquist was sent to a dam project in Tennessee. Okonkwo was reassigned to a Corps office in Louisiana. Halverson received orders for a facility in Montana. Begay, who had requested reassignment, was moved to a remote station in Alaska. None of them ever worked at Bonneville Dam again. Efforts to locate their families or descendants have been largely unsuccessful. Halverson's granddaughter, contacted by a researcher in 2017, said her grandfather rarely spoke about his time at the dam. But she recalled one detail from her childhood. He had always refused to let his children play near rivers. He never explained why. The original witness statements were removed from the Bonneville Dam archives at some point between 1955 and 1960. The personnel files of all 4 men contain no mention of the September incident. Lieutenant Colonel Dietrich's preliminary report survived only because a copy was misfiled in an unrelated folder and discovered during a records audit in 2001. Local tribal elders have their own stories about the Columbia River. stories that predate the dams, the settlers, the highways that now line the gorge. Some speak of the river as a living thing, with a memory older than the mountains. Others mention figures seen walking the waters during times of great change, omens perhaps, or echoes of those who drowned when the land was flooded. A Yakima elder named Russell Whitefeather, interviewed in 1998 for an oral history project, said his grandmother had warned him about a woman in the river when he was a boy. She told him that if he ever saw her, he should look away immediately. She told him the woman was still looking for something she had lost. He did not say what that something was. Today, the observation platform where the four men stood no longer exists. It was removed during a renovation in 1971. The area where the woman was first sighted is now part of a restricted zone, accessible only to authorized personnel. But fishermen still work the waters downstream, occasionally on overcast mornings when the mist hangs low over the spillway. One of them will mention seeing something strange, a shape in the current, a figure that moves the wrong direction, a woman who seems to walk where no one should be able to stand. They do not report it. They have learned that some things are better left unseen. Some errors are not mistakes at all. Dog Mountain rises 3,000 feet above the Columbia River on the Washington side of the gorge, approximately 12 miles east of Stevenson. The trail to its summit is considered one of the most strenuous day hikes in the region, a 6-mile round trip that gains nearly 3,000 feet in elevation through dense Douglas fir forest and open wildflower meadows. In spring, the slopes turn golden with balsam root. In autumn, fog settles in the ravines and stays for days. The mountain takes its name from a 19th-century surveyor's note describing a rock formation near the summit that resembled a sitting dog. The formation no longer exists. It likely collapsed during one of the region's frequent landslides, but the name remains. The area has been mapped continuously since the 1880s, first by private railroad surveyors, then by the United States Geological Survey beginning in 1896. Mapping the Columbia River Gorge has always been complicated. The terrain is unstable. Landslides reshape the cliffs every few decades. The river itself has been dammed, diverted, and artificially widened. Cartographers have had to revise their work constantly just to keep up with the changing landscape. But some revisions are harder to explain than others. Between 1934 and 1961, every official topographic map of the Dog Mountain Quadrant produced by the USGS contained a small inlet on the Washington side of the river, approximately 1.3 miles southwest of the mountain's base. The inlet was depicted as roughly 200 feet wide, extending approximately 400 feet inland. It was labeled on some maps as Harker Cove. On others, it had no name at all. The inlet does not exist. It has never existed. There is no geological formation at that location that could support such a feature. Aerial photographs from the 1930s show nothing but forested slope meeting the river's edge. And yet, for 27 years, cartographers kept drawing it. The anomaly was first identified in 1983 by a graduate student named Marcus Wayland, who was conducting research on historical land use patterns in the Gorge for his doctoral thesis at the University of Oregon. Wayland had requested access to archival maps at the USGS regional office in Portland and was cross-referencing them with aerial survey photographs from the same periods. The discrepancy was immediately obvious. The inlet appeared on every USGS topographic map issued between 1934 and 1961, but it did not appear on any map before or after those dates. More importantly, it did not appear in any aerial photograph, not from 1936, not from 1942, not from 1955. The photographs showed an unbroken tree line. The maps showed water. Wayland initially assumed it was a simple error, perhaps a misinterpretation of shadow patterns or a drafting mistake that had been copied from edition to edition. He submitted a request to review the original survey notes for the affected maps. What he found was more troubling. In a folder labeled Dog Mountain Quadrant, Field Notes, 1933 to 1935, Wayland discovered a handwritten memorandum on USGS letterhead. The note, dated March 7, 1931, instructed all future cartographers to include the inlet at the specified coordinates. It described the feature as essential to accurate representation and not to be omitted under any circumstances. The note was signed by a man named Elliot J. Bruckner, identified as a senior surveyor with the agency. Wayland searched the USGS personnel records. Elliot Bruckner had indeed worked for the agency, but he had died in October of 1928, more than 2 years before the memorandum was dated. He had drowned during a survey expedition near the White Salmon River, approximately 15 miles upstream. His body was never recovered. Wayland brought his findings to his thesis advisor, Dr. Lorraine Matsuda, a geographer who had worked extensively with federal mapping agencies. Matsuda was skeptical but intrigued. She made inquiries through her contacts at the USGS. The responses were unusual. A senior archivist named Gerald Farnsworth told Matsuda that he had no knowledge of the Bruckner Memorandum and that no such document should exist in the files. When Matsuda mentioned that Wayland had photographed the document, Farnsworth asked for copies. She sent them. She never received a response. 2 weeks later, Wayland returned to the Portland office to continue his research. The folder containing the memorandum was gone. The archivist on duty told him the materials had been reclassified and were no longer available for public review. Other researchers who worked in the same archive during that period offered conflicting accounts. A retired cartographer named Dennis Urbaniak, interviewed in 2009, recalled seeing the Bruckner Memorandum himself in the late 1970s. He described it as strange, but said he had assumed it was a clerical error, perhaps a misfiled document from a different project. But Urbaniak also remembered something else. He said that during his time at the agency, it was considered bad form to ask questions about the Dog Mountain Inlet. Senior staff referred to it as the correction, a term that implied the inlet was not an error, but an intentional addition. We all knew it wasn't real, Urbaniak said, but nobody wanted to be the one to take it off the map. The inlet was quietly removed from USGS maps beginning with the 1962 edition. No explanation was ever given. No correction notice was issued. The feature simply disappeared, as if it had never been there. Efforts to understand why the inlet was included and why it was removed have yielded few answers. The USGS maintains no official record of the Bruckner Memorandum. A Freedom of Information request submitted in 2014 returned no responsive documents. The agency's Public Affairs Office stated that historical mapping errors are not uncommon and that the matter did not warrant further investigation. But independent researchers have continued to probe the mystery. A historian named Patricia Gunderson, who specializes in Pacific Northwest cartography, published a paper in 2011 examining the Dog Mountain anomaly. She found that similar unexplained features had appeared on maps of other locations in the gorge during the same period: a road that led nowhere near Cascade Locks, a creek that flowed uphill near Hood River, a building marked on federal land where no structure had ever stood. All of these features were removed in the early 1960s. None were ever explained. Gunderson also noted a pattern in the personnel records. Several cartographers who worked on the Dog Mountain Quadrant during the affected period requested transfers or resigned unexpectedly. One man, a draftsman named Oscar Kowalczyk, left the agency in 1947 after just 8 months of employment. His exit interview, obtained through an archive at the National Personnel Records Center, contained a single handwritten note. Refuses to discuss work product. Requests no further contact. Kowalczyk died in 1982. His family declined to be interviewed. The location where the inlet was marked, 1.3 miles southwest of Dog Mountain, is now part of a restricted watershed area. Public access has been prohibited since 1959. The Forest Service cites erosion concerns and habitat protection as the reasons for the closure. No geological survey of the area has been conducted since 1954. Marcus Wayland completed his doctoral thesis in 1985. He did not include his findings about the inlet. He later told a colleague that he had been advised to focus on more productive avenues of research. He left academia in 1991 and took a position with a private surveying firm in Colorado. He has not spoken publicly about the Bruckner Memorandum since, but the photographs he took in 1983 still exist. They show a faded document on official letterhead, dated 3 years after its author's death, instructing men who would never meet him to draw something that was not there. The handwriting is neat and unhurried, the signature is steady, and the inlet on every map that followed is precisely where the dead man said it should be. The cargo vanishes somewhere between the darkness and the light. Cape Horn is a promontory on the Washington side of the Columbia River Gorge, rising nearly 1,400 feet above the water. The basalt cliffs there are among the most dramatic in the Pacific Northwest. Sheer walls of ancient lava flow that have been carved by wind and water for millions of years. The Cape Horn Trail, opened to the public in 2008, offers views that stretch for miles in either direction. But long before hikers discovered the overlook, the railroads claimed the land below. The first tracks were laid through the gorge in 1883 by the Oregon Railway and Navigation Company. The route required blasting through solid rock, bridging ravines, and constructing tunnels that remain in use to this day. The line changed hands several times over the following century: Union Pacific, Burlington Northern, and eventually BNSF Railway, which now operates the corridor as one of the busiest freight routes in the western United States. More than 40 trains pass through the Cape Horn section every day. They carry grain from the Midwest, lumber from Oregon, consumer goods from the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. The trains move through a series of 3 tunnels carved into the cliff face, the longest stretching nearly half a mile through the mountain. Inside the tunnels, there is no cell service, no GPS signal, and no natural light. Workers call it the Gap. Most trains pass through without incident, but not all of them. The first documented anomaly occurred on the morning of March 19, 1997. A westbound freight train designated as Unit 742 departed Wishram, Washington at 6:14 in the morning, carrying 72 cars of agricultural equipment bound for the port of Vancouver. The manifest listed combines, tractors, and seed drills, heavy machinery secured with chains and tarps. The train was inspected at Wishram before departure. All doors were sealed. All cargo was accounted for. The train arrived at the Vancouver switching yard at 9:47 in the morning. Yard workers conducting a routine inspection found every car door standing open. The tarps were gone. The chains lay coiled on the floor of each car. The cargo, all 72 cars worth, had vanished. The conductor, a 31-year veteran named Raymond Thibault, insisted that nothing unusual had occurred during the journey. He had not stopped. He had not noticed any disturbance. He had passed through the Cape Horn tunnels at approximately 7:22 in the morning, just as the morning fog was lifting from the river. Thibault was tested for drugs and alcohol. The results were negative. He was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The railway's Internal Security Division conducted interviews, reviewed schedules, and inspected the rail line. They found nothing. The cargo was never recovered. No insurance claim was filed. The incident was classified internally as unexplained loss, and the file was closed within 60 days. Raymond Thibault returned to work but requested reassignment to a different route. He retired in 2004 and declined to discuss the incident with journalists or researchers. He passed away in 2019. His family said he never spoke about what happened. In the years that followed, similar incidents were reported with increasing frequency. A freight handler named Dolores Vega, who worked the Vancouver yard from 2001 to 2010, recalled at least a dozen trains arriving with open doors and empty cars during her tenure. She described the pattern as always the same: full manifests, sealed departures, and nothing inside upon arrival. You'd open the first car expecting pallets, Vega said in a 2015 interview with a regional newspaper. And there'd just be air, clean floor, no residue, no damage, like nothing had ever been there. She noted that the incidents were never discussed openly among workers. Supervisors would arrive, take photographs, and leave without explanation. The affected cars would be cleaned and returned to service within hours. A retired engineer named Franklin Irvine provided a different perspective. Irving ran the Cape Horn route from 1989 to 2006 and claimed to have experienced the phenomenon firsthand on at least 3 occasions. "You feel it in the tunnels," Irvin said. "The train gets lighter, not by much, just enough that you notice. The drag changes, the brakes respond different. By the time you come out the other side, something's off." Irvin said he reported the sensation to dispatch each time. He was told to continue to his destination. No follow-up was ever conducted. Another witness, a signal maintainer named Gregory Sato, who worked the Cape Horn section from 2003 to 2011, described a related anomaly. He said that on several occasions he observed trains entering the main tunnel with closed doors and emerging with them open, a span of less than 90 seconds. "There's no stop inside," Sato said. "No siding, no place to pull off, and the doors were open, every single one." He submitted 3 separate incident reports. None were acknowledged. BNSF Railway has never publicly commented on the Cape Horn anomalies. Requests for information submitted under the Freedom of Information Act have been denied on the grounds that the railway is a private corporation and not subject to federal disclosure requirements. However, internal documents obtained by an independent researcher in 2012 suggest that the company conducted at least 2 formal investigations into the incidents, one in 1999 and another in 2007. The 1999 investigation focused on the possibility of theft. Investigators theorized that organized criminals might be using the tunnels as cover for coordinated cargo removal, perhaps employing accomplices stationed inside the mountain who could unload freight during the brief transit window. But the theory was abandoned after engineers determined that the train's speed through the tunnels, approximately 35 miles per hour, made manual unloading physically impossible. The 2007 investigation took a different approach. Security cameras were installed at both ends of the main tunnel to monitor train cars as they entered and exited. The footage was reviewed for 6 months. The results were never made public. But according to a former BNSF security analyst who spoke on condition of anonymity, the cameras confirmed what workers had long suspected. The trains entered with closed doors and exited with open ones. The footage showed no human activity, no mechanical failure, no explanation. "The doors just opened," the analyst said, "between one frame and the next, like they'd never been closed at all." The investigation was terminated in 2008. The cameras were removed. The analyst was transferred to a different division. No further studies were conducted. Theories have circulated among railroad enthusiasts and amateur investigators for years. Some suggest electromagnetic interference from the basalt formations, a phenomenon known to disrupt compasses and radio signals in volcanic regions. Others point to pressure differentials inside the tunnels, though no known pressure system could unlatch sealed cargo doors. A few have speculated about the gorge's indigenous history. The Klickitat and Yakama peoples considered certain sections of the river sacred and spoke of places where the physical world grew thin, but no theory has been proven, no explanation has been accepted. The Cape Horn tunnels remain in constant use. Trains pass through every hour, carrying goods worth millions of dollars. The vast majority arrive intact, their cargo undisturbed, their doors sealed exactly as they were at departure. But workers still talk about the ones that don't. They describe a particular quality of silence inside the tunnels, a heaviness that seems to press against the ears. They speak of trains that feel different coming out than they did going in. They mention doors that open without reason and cargo that disappears without trace. No one knows where it goes. No one knows why it happens. And no one at BNSF, it seems, is looking for answers anymore. The trains keep running, the manifests keep filling, and somewhere in the darkness beneath Cape Horn, something continues to take what was never offered. The doors always close again before anyone can see what opened them. The fire always knows when to return. Rowena Crest rises 730 feet above the Columbia River, approximately 8 miles east of Mosier, Oregon. The viewpoint there offers one of the most photographed panoramas in the Pacific Northwest, a sweeping vista of the Gorge's dramatic basalt formations, the winding curves of the historic Columbia River Highway, and the patchwork of oak savanna and grassland that blankets the plateau. In spring, the slopes erupt with wildflowers, balsam root, lupine, and prairie star. By late summer, the grass turns gold and brittle. The land belongs to the Tom McCall Preserve, named for the Oregon governor who championed environmental protection in the 1970s. The Nature Conservancy has managed the site since 1984, working to restore native habitat and control invasive species. Fire has always been part of that landscape. The Wasco and Wishram peoples who lived along the river for thousands of years used controlled burns to maintain the meadows and encourage new growth. Lightning strikes have sparked natural fires for as long as the gorge has existed. But there is one fire that does not follow the rules of nature. It occurs every 11 years in a clearing approximately 300 yards southeast of the main viewpoint. It ignites on the 14th of September. It burns precisely 4.7 acres, and it stops, always, at the first light of dawn. The pattern has repeated without variation for more than 130 years. The earliest recorded instance comes from the journal of a settler named Horace Pemberton, who homesteaded near the present-day town of Rowena in 1886. His entry for September 15, 1887, describes a fire he witnessed the previous night. "The blaze began after midnight in the meadow above the bluffs," Pemberton wrote. "I rode up at first light expecting devastation, but found only a blackened circle, perhaps 5 acres, still smoking. The grass beyond it was untouched. I could find no cause, no lightning, no campfire, no evidence of man or beast." Pemberton noted that local Wasco elders seemed unsurprised by the fire. One man told him, through a translator, that the burning ground had always remembered its purpose. Pemberton did not record what that purpose was. He died in 1894, and his journal was donated to the Oregon Historical Society in 1931. The next documented fire occurred on September 14, 1898. A surveyor named Adelaide Moreau, working for the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company, reported a brush fire at the same location while conducting topographic measurements. Her field notes described the burn area as remarkably uniform, and note that the fire appeared to have extinguished itself sometime before dawn. The pattern continued through the 20th century, 1909, 1920, 1931, 1942, 1953, 1964, 1975, 1986, 1997, 2008, and most recently, 2019. Each fire occurred on the same date. Each burned the same acreage. Each stopped at sunrise. No human cause has ever been identified. No lightning strike has ever been recorded on those nights. The mathematical precision of the 11-year cycle matches no known natural phenomenon. Those who have witnessed the fire describe it in remarkably similar terms. Glenn Horikawa, a retired Forest Service ranger who worked the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area from 1982 to 2011, was present for the 1986 and 1997 fires. He described both experiences in an interview conducted in 2014. 1986, I was stationed at the Mosier Lookout, Horikawa recalled. Dispatch called around 1 in the morning, report of a glow on Rowena Crest. I drove up expecting the worst. By the time I got there, the fire was burning steady, maybe 4 or 5 acres. No spread, no wind carrying it, just sitting there, like it was waiting. He said he remained on scene until dawn. At first light, the fire simply stopped. Not burned out, Horikawa clarified. Stopped. There was still fuel at the edges, dry grass, brush. It should have kept going, but it didn't. Horikawa witnessed the 1997 fire from the same vantage point. He described it as identical in every way, and said he left the service shortly afterward, in part because his reports were consistently dismissed or ignored. A volunteer fire coordinator named Patricia Sundquist responded to the 2008 incident. She arrived on scene at approximately 2:30 in the morning and found the fire burning in what she described as a perfect oval. Fires don't do that, Sundquist said. They follow terrain, wind, fuel loads. This one looked like someone had drawn a boundary and told it not to cross. She also noted that her radio equipment malfunctioned while she was on site. Transmissions were garbled or failed entirely until she moved approximately a quarter-mile away from the burn area. A local photographer named Daniel Esperanza captured images of the 2019 fire from the historic highway overlook. His photographs, which circulated briefly on social media before being removed for unspecified reasons, showed a glow against the night sky that appeared to pulse at regular intervals, approximately once every 8 seconds. Esperanza reported that the pulsing was visible to the naked eye, but did not register on his camera's video function. It was like the fire was breathing, he said. He declined further interviews. Official records of the Rowena Crest fires are fragmented and inconsistent. The Oregon Department of Forestry maintains incident reports dating back to 1942. Each report lists the fire's cause as undetermined natural origin, a classification typically reserved for lightning-ignited fires where the specific strike cannot be identified. But meteorological records from the National Weather Service show no lightning activity in Wasco County on any of the September 14th dates in question. A request submitted to the Forest Service in 2010 under the Freedom of Information Act sought all documentation related to the recurring fires at Rowena Crest. The response, received after 14 months, contained only 3 pages of material, 2 incident summaries, and a single internal memorandum from 1976. The memorandum, authored by a regional fire management officer named Walter Dvorak, recommended that no further investigative resources be allocated to the Rowena Crest phenomenon. Dvorak wrote that the fires posed no significant threat to life or property, and that attempts to determine their cause had proven inconclusive across multiple cycles. He also noted in a handwritten addendum that personnel assigned to monitor the fires had reported unusual psychological effects, including disorientation, time distortion, and persistent auditory hallucinations in the days following exposure. He recommended that future monitoring be conducted from a distance of no less than 1,000 feet. The Nature Conservancy, which manages the Tom McCall Preserve, has never publicly acknowledged the recurring fires. A staff ecologist who spoke off the record in 2016 said that the organization was aware of the historical pattern, but considered it outside the scope of habitat management priorities. When asked whether the 11-year cycle had been studied or explained, the ecologist paused for several seconds before responding. "Some things don't want to be explained," she said, "and some things don't need to be." Whoosh! The next fire is due on September 14, 2030. Those who have studied the pattern say they know exactly where it will occur. The same clearing, the same oval shape, the same 4.7 acres. They know it will ignite sometime after midnight and stop at dawn. They know no cause will be found. What they do not know is why. The Wasco people who once lived along the river had a name for the place, though it has been lost to time. Elders who spoke with researchers in the early 20th century referred to it only as the ground that remembers. They said the fire was not destruction, but renewal, a wound that healed itself by reopening. They said the land had made a promise long ago, and that it intended to keep it. The grass on Rowena Crest grows back every year. The wildflowers return every spring. And every 11 years in the same spot, on the same night, the fire returns too. It always has. It always will. And no one knows who first struck the match. The water has never been loud enough to drown out the singing. Multnomah Falls drops 620 feet in 2 cascades down a basalt cliff face in the Columbia River Gorge, approximately 30 miles east of Portland, Oregon. It is the tallest waterfall in the state and the most visited natural recreation site in the Pacific Northwest, drawing more than 2 million visitors annually. The falls are fed by underground springs from Larch Mountain, supplemented by snowmelt and rainfall. The flow varies by season, but never stops entirely. Even in the driest summers, water continues to pour over the ancient rock. The site has been sacred to indigenous peoples for thousands of years. The Multnomah tribe, part of the Chinookan-speaking peoples of the Lower Columbia, gave the falls their name. According to one oral tradition recorded by settlers in the 19th century, a young woman once threw herself from the upper cascade to appease the spirits and end a plague that was killing her people. Whether this story is authentic or embellished by Euro-American collectors remains a matter of scholarly debate. What is certain is that the falls have long been considered a place of spiritual significance, a threshold between worlds. The Benson Bridge, a concrete footbridge spanning the lower falls at the 105-foot level, was constructed in 1914. The original structure was damaged by falling rocks in 2014 and rebuilt in 2018. Above it, a steep trail winds through forest and switchbacks to the upper viewing platform, where visitors can stand level with the top of the cascade and feel the mist on their faces. It is here, at the upper platform that the singing has been heard. Doi. The earliest documented account appears in the travel diary of a woman named Genevieve Cartwright, who visited the falls in August of 1909. Cartwright was a schoolteacher from Salem, Oregon, traveling with her sister and brother-in-law. Her entry for August 17th describes reaching the upper platform in late afternoon, when the light was golden and the mist hung thick in the air. "We rested at the top and admired the view," Cartwright wrote. "After some minutes, I became aware of a sound beneath the water, or perhaps behind it. It was singing, children's voices, many of them, in a language I did not recognize. My sister heard nothing. My brother-in-law suggested it was the wind. But I know what I heard. It was a hymn. It was beautiful. And it was coming from inside the mountain." Cartwright noted that the singing lasted approximately 3 minutes before fading. She described the language as neither English nor any tongue I have encountered, and said the melody was simple, almost mournful, like a lullaby for the dead. Her diary was donated to the Oregon Historical Society in 1952 by her grandniece. A notation in the donation record indicates that the grandniece had read the passage and found it curious but not alarming. Similar accounts have surfaced at irregular intervals throughout the following century. A park ranger's incident log from 1937 mentions a family reporting unusual sounds at the upper platform. A letter to the editor of the Oregonian in 1954 describes a woman hearing children singing behind the falls. A visitor survey collected by the Forest Service in 1971 includes a handwritten comment. "Beautiful hike, strange music at the top. Where does it come from?" The accounts shared a common element. The singing is always described as children's voices, never adults. The language is always unrecognized. The sound always seems to originate from behind the waterfall, where there is no space for anyone to stand. Suas. In 1983, an audio engineer named Victor Lindqvist attempted to record the phenomenon. Lindqvist had read about the singing in a collection of Pacific Northwest folklore published by a small regional press. Skeptical but intrigued, he visited the falls on 4 separate occasions between April and September of that year, carrying professional-grade recording equipment. On his 3rd visit in July, he captured something. "I was at the upper platform around 6 in the evening," Lindqvist wrote in notes that accompanied the recording. "The crowd had thinned. I heard it clearly, voices, harmonizing, coming from the direction of the falls. I let the tape run for approximately 7 minutes." The recording, which has circulated among acoustic researchers and folklore enthusiasts for decades, is difficult to interpret. The dominant sound is the roar of the waterfall. But beneath it, at certain frequencies, there appears to be a pattern, a rising and falling that some listeners describe as melodic. Others hear only white noise. Lindqvist submitted the recording to the Linguistics Department at the University of Washington in 1984. A graduate student named Rosemary Oduya agreed to analyze it. Her preliminary report noted possible vocalizations in the 17 to 22 Hz range, below the threshold of normal human hearing, but detectable with specialized equipment. Oduya attempted to isolate the sounds, but found that they did not behave like typical audio signals. The patterns seemed to shift depending on how the recording was filtered, as if the sound itself was unstable. "I cannot confirm that these are human voices," Oduya wrote in her final assessment, "but I also cannot explain what else they might be." She recommended further study. No follow-up was ever conducted. Oduya left academia in 1987 and currently works in private industry. She has declined all requests for interviews on the subject. The Forest Service, which manages Multnomah Falls as part of the Columbia River, Gorge National Scenic Area has never officially acknowledged the singing phenomenon. A search of public records reveals only scattered references. An internal memorandum from 1965 mentions acoustic anomalies reported by visitors and recommends that rangers respond to such reports with standard reassurance regarding natural sound patterns. A training document from 1978 includes a brief section on unusual visitor experiences and advises staff to listen politely and document if necessary, but avoid speculation. No formal investigation has ever been conducted. No scientific study has been commissioned. The matter appears to have been treated as a minor nuisance, something to be managed rather than explained. Attempts to understand the phenomenon through conventional acoustics have yielded limited results. The basalt amphitheater surrounding the falls creates complex echo patterns. Sound waves bounce off the cliff face, the pool below, and the surrounding forest. In theory, these reflections could create auditory illusions, fragments of conversation or music carried from elsewhere and distorted into something unrecognizable. But this explanation does not account for the consistency of the reports. Visitors separated by decades describe the same experience. Children singing in unison in an unknown language from behind solid rock. A linguist named Dr. Emanuel Petrov, who specializes in extinct and reconstructed languages, examined transcriptions of the Lindqvist recording in 2011. He compared the phonetic patterns to known indigenous languages of the Pacific Northwest, including Chinookan, Sahaptin, and Salish dialects. He found no match. If these are voices, Petrov wrote, they are speaking something I cannot identify. The phoneme structure does not correspond to any documented language family. It is possible that we are hearing something very old, or something that was never meant to be a language at all. He did not elaborate on what the alternative might be. The singing continues to be reported. A visitor log maintained by volunteers at the Multnomah Falls Lodge contains dozens of entries from the past 2 decades describing unusual sounds at the upper platform. Most are brief. Heard singing, strange music near the top, kids' voices. Where were they? A few are more detailed, mentioning the direction of the sound, the duration, the emotional quality. One entry from September of 2016 stands out. It was written by a woman who identified herself only by her first name, Ingrid. I heard them singing, she wrote. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. I don't know what language it was. I don't know where it came from. But I know they were children, and I know they wanted someone to listen. She added a final line, underlined twice. I think they've been singing for a very long time. The falls continue to pour. The mist continues to rise, and somewhere behind 600 feet of water and ancient stone, the choir continues its hymn, patient, wordless, waiting. No one has ever found them. No one has ever seen them. But the song, for those who can hear it, never ends. The camera recorded what no one was there to see. Stevenson, Washington sits on the north bank of the Columbia River, approximately 45 miles east of Portland. The town serves as the seat of Skamania County, one of the least populated counties in the state. Its year-round population hovers around 1,300. In summer, that number swells with tourists drawn to the gorge's hiking trails, waterfalls, and scenic overlooks. In winter, the town grows quiet. The fog rolls in from the river and stays for days. The Columbia River Gorge has been a destination for photographers since the 1880s, when expeditionary teams first documented its basalt cliffs and thundering cascades. By the mid-20th century, it had become one of the most photographed landscapes in the Pacific Northwest. Families posed at Multnomah Falls. Couples stood at Crown Point. Amateur photographers captured the same vistas that professionals had been selling as postcards for generations. For nearly 2 decades, many of those photographs were developed at a small shop on 2nd Street in downtown Stevenson. The business, called Gorge Photo Lab, operated from 1968 to 1991. It offered standard services, film processing, reprints, enlargements, and catered primarily to tourists passing through on their way to or from the scenic highway. The shop changed ownership twice during its existence. Its records were never digitized. Most were discarded when the building was sold in 1993. But among the former employees and longtime residents of Stevenson, stories persist about a particular category of photographs that came through the lab. They called them the wrong angles. The first documented case occurred in July of 1971. A couple from Boise, Idaho, Harold and Marguerite Oconedo, dropped off a roll of 36 exposure film after spending a weekend in the Gorge. The roll contained standard vacation shots. The two of them at Beacon Rock, a sunset over the river, wildflowers along the trail. When they picked up their prints 3 days later, everything appeared normal, except for one image. It showed the Oconedos standing at the Rowena Crest viewpoint, the Columbia River winding behind them. The composition was familiar. They remembered taking it, but the angle was wrong. The photograph had been taken from a position approximately 40 feet in front of them and 20 feet above the ground. There was no platform at that location, no cliff edge, no tree. The only thing at that spot was empty air over a 700-foot drop. Harold Oconedo brought the print back to the lab and asked for an explanation. The technician on duty, a young man named Curtis Vanderhook, examined the negative. It matched the print exactly. There was no evidence of double exposure, splicing, or manipulation. The image was a single, unaltered frame. Vanderhook later told a local journalist that he had never seen anything like it. The Oconedos left Stevenson without an answer. They did not return. Over the following 18 years, 16 more customers reported similar anomalies. The photographs varied, different locations, different subjects, different years, but the pattern was consistent. Each image showed a scene the customer remembered photographing. Each was taken from an angle that was physically impossible, and each negative matched the print without evidence of tampering. Former employees of Gorge Photo Lab have offered conflicting accounts of how the anomalies were handled. Curtis Vanderhook, who worked at the lab from 1969 to 1976, said that management initially dismissed the reports as customer confusion. "People forget where they were standing," he recalled in a 2008 interview. "They get their shots mixed up." That was the official line. But Vanderhook admitted that the explanation never satisfied him. He personally processed at least 4 of the anomalous rolls and said the negatives showed no signs of manipulation. "You can't fake a perspective shift on film," he said. "Not like that, not without cutting and splicing, and there was no splice." A later employee, a woman named Renata Mifsud, who worked at the lab from 1982 to 1988, described a more deliberate response. She said the owner at the time, a man named Lyle Gustafson, kept a separate folder for problem prints and instructed staff not to discuss them with customers beyond offering a refund or reprint. "He never said anything was wrong," Mifsud recalled, "but he also never threw those prints away. He kept them in a file cabinet in the back. I saw it once, must have been 24 envelopes in there, all labeled with dates and locations." Gustafson died in 1997. His widow sold the building's contents at a state auction. The file cabinet was not among the items listed in the auction catalog. Its whereabouts are unknown. A customer named Joanne Przybilski, who visited the gorge in August of 1984, provided one of the most detailed accounts of the phenomenon. She had taken a photograph of her husband standing at the edge of a trail near Cape Horn. When the prints came back, the image showed him from behind, as if the photographer had been standing on the opposite side of the cliff, looking back toward the trail. "I was the only one with the camera," Przybilski said. "There was no one else on the trail that day, and even if there had been, they would have had to be standing in the air, over the river. It's not possible." She kept the photograph. She still has it. No formal investigation was ever conducted into the Gorge Photo Lab anomalies. The Skamania County Sheriff's Office has no records of complaints or reports related to the business. The Washington State Department of Licensing, which oversaw commercial photography labs at the time, has no documentation of inspections or violations. The anomalies, it seems, were never reported to any official authority. Photographic experts consulted in later years have offered various hypotheses. Some suggested light leaks or equipment malfunctions that could have created distorted images. Others proposed that the anomalies were the result of reflection or refraction, light bouncing off the river's surface in unusual ways. A few speculated about deliberate hoaxes, though no motive or method was ever identified. None of these explanations account for the consistency of the reports. The impossible angles were not random distortions. They were coherent images, properly exposed and focused, showing scenes from perspectives that no human photographer could have occupied. A retired forensic analyst named Douglas Kittredge examined 3 of the surviving photographs in 2014 at the request of an independent researcher. His report noted that the images showed no evidence of compositing, double exposure, or post-processing manipulation. The negatives, he concluded, were authentic single-frame exposures. He added a caveat. The perspective depicted in these images would require the camera to be positioned at a location inconsistent with the known terrain. I have no explanation for how this was achieved. The researcher who commissioned the analysis attempted to contact other customers who had reported anomalies. Of the 17 documented cases, only 6 could be traced. 3 declined to be interviewed. 2 had died. One, Joanne Przybilski, agreed to speak, but said she had stopped trying to understand what had happened. "I know what I saw," she said. "I know where I was standing, and I know that photograph is impossible, but it exists. So something is wrong with what I know." Gorge Photo Lab closed in 1991. The building was converted into a gift shop, then a real estate office, then left vacant. It was demolished in 2005 to make way for a parking lot. The 17 anomalous photographs have never been collected or studied as a group. Most have been lost, discarded, or forgotten. A few remain in private hands, tucked into albums, stored in shoeboxes, kept as curiosities by people who never found an explanation. The negatives, where they survive, still match the prints. The angles remain impossible. The scenes remain familiar. And somewhere in those images, in the space between the camera and the subject, in the air above the river, in the place where no one was standing, something was watching. It saw what the tourists saw. It framed what they framed. And it pressed the shutter at the exact same moment from a place that does not exist. The photographs developed exactly as they should have. That is what makes them wrong. The river knows how deep it really is. The Bridge of the Gods spans the Columbia River at Cascade Locks, Oregon, connecting the town to the Washington side of the gorge approximately 40 miles east of Portland. The current steel cantilever bridge was completed in 1926, replacing a series of ferry crossings that had served the region since the mid-19th century. It takes its name from a Klickitat legend describing a natural land bridge that once crossed the river at this location, a formation supposedly destroyed by the gods after a great battle between two brothers who became the volcanic peaks now known as Mount Hood and Mount Adams. Geologists have confirmed that a massive landslide, known as the Bonneville Slide, did dam the Columbia River at this approximate location sometime between 1200 and 1450. The resulting natural bridge lasted anywhere from several months to several years before the river broke through. The legend, it seems, had a foundation in fact. Today, the Bridge of the Gods carries a single lane of traffic in each direction and serves as a crossing point for the Pacific Crest Trail. The river beneath it moves at approximately 3 to 4 miles per hour during normal flow, fed by snowmelt from the Cascades and regulated by the Bonneville Dam, just 3 miles downstream. The official depth at the bridge crossing, according to Army Corps of Engineers surveys, averages between 35 and 45 feet, depending on seasonal conditions. But not all measurements agree. Since at least 1978, fishermen, recreational boaters, and commercial vessel operators have reported anomalous sonar readings in a zone approximately 1/4 mile upstream from the bridge. The readings consistently indicate depths exceeding 200 feet, more than 5 times the official figure. The discrepancy has never been explained. The first formal documentation of the anomaly appears in the logbook of a commercial tugboat captain named Edwin Rasmussen, who operated on the Columbia from 1972 to 1991. Rasmussen's entry for October 3, 1978 describes a routine transit past Cascade Locks. As his vessel approached the Bridge of the Gods, the depth sounder, a standard Furuno model used throughout the commercial fleet, suddenly registered a reading of 218 feet. The reading held for approximately 90 seconds before returning to the expected 42 feet. Rasmussen noted the incident but did not report it formally. He assumed equipment malfunction. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Same location, same approximate depth reading, same duration. This time he mentioned it to a colleague, another captain named Bernard So, who admitted he had experienced something similar the previous summer. Over the following years, Rasmussen documented 14 separate instances of the anomaly. His logs, which he kept meticulously until his retirement, show readings ranging from 192 feet to 231 feet. The location was always the same, a zone roughly 300 yards upstream from the bridge, closer to the Washington shore. He never filed an official report. When asked why, years later, he said simply, "Who would I have told, and what would they have done about it?" Rasmussen died in 2009. His logbooks were donated to the Columbia Gorge Interpretive Center in Stevenson, Washington, where they remain in the archive collection. The 1994 dive was organized by the Army Corps of Engineers as part of a routine infrastructure assessment of the Bridge of the Gods. The team consisted of 4 divers, 2 from the Corps and 2 contracted from a commercial diving firm based in Seattle. Their assignment was to inspect the bridge pilings and survey the riverbed for debris or erosion that might affect structural integrity. It was considered a standard operation. The team leader, a Corps diver named Marcus Olerud, had logged more than 600 hours of underwater work on rivers and dams throughout the Pacific Northwest. He was known among colleagues as calm, methodical, and not prone to exaggeration. On April 17, 1994, the team entered the water at approximately 9:30 in the morning. Visibility was poor, typical for the Columbia, where silt and glacial sediment limit sight to a few feet in most conditions. The divers descended along a guideline attached to the nearest piling. At a depth of approximately 38 feet, Olerud's depth gauge stopped responding. He signaled the others to hold position while he checked his equipment. When he looked down, he later said he could see nothing but darkness, a blackness that seemed to extend far beyond what the riverbed should have allowed. He did not descend further. One of the contract divers, a woman named Sonia Erickson, attempted to continue the survey. She descended an additional 12 feet before her equipment began to malfunction. Her dive computer registered a depth of 51 feet, then 68, then 94, readings that increased faster than her actual rate of descent. She surfaced immediately. The fourth diver, a man named Terence Aguimong, never entered the water. He later said he had seen something in Erickson's face when she surfaced, a look I'd never seen from a diver before, and decided the operation was compromised. The team aborted the dive. No official report was filed. The contract divers returned to Seattle and declined further work on the Columbia. Olerud requested reassignment and was transferred to a core facility in California. Erickson left commercial diving entirely within the year. When contacted by a journalist in 2011, she would say only that the river wasn't right, and that she had never felt anything like it before or since. The Army Corps of Engineers has never publicly acknowledged the 1994 incident. A Freedom of Information Act request submitted in 2013 sought all documentation related to diving operations at the Bridge of the Gods between 1990 and 2000. The response included 17 pages of material, primarily routine inspection logs and equipment inventories. No record of the April 1994 dive was included. A follow-up request specifically referencing the dive team by name was denied on the grounds that the requested records do not exist or cannot be located. Bathymetric surveys of the Columbia River, conducted by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, show consistent depth readings in the Cascade Locks area, ranging from 30 to 50 feet, depending on location and season. No survey has ever indicated depths exceeding 100 feet anywhere between Bonneville Dam and the Dalles. But NOAA surveys do not cover the specific zone where the anomalies have been reported. The area is classified as non-navigable due to its proximity to the bridge pilings and is excluded from standard charting protocols. Acoustic researchers have proposed several theories for the anomalous readings. Sonar signals can be disrupted by temperature gradients, submerged debris, or pockets of gas released from decomposing organic matter on the riverbed. In some cases, signals can reflect off layers of sediment in ways that create false depth readings. None of these explanations account for the consistency of the reports of the same location, the same approximate depth, the same duration, or for the experiences of the 1994 dive team. A hydrologist named Dr. Annika Johansson, who studied the Columbia River system for nearly 3 decades, examined the available data in 2016. Her assessment was cautious but direct. There is no geological or hydrological explanation for a 200-foot void in the riverbed at that location, she wrote. The Bonneville Slide debris field does create irregular topography, but nothing approaching those depths. Either the instruments are malfunctioning in a highly specific and repeatable way, or the river contains something that is not reflected in our surveys. She recommended further investigation. None was conducted. The Bridge of the Gods remains in daily use. Cars cross. Hikers walk. The Pacific Crest Trail passes overhead, carrying travelers between Oregon and Washington. Below, the Columbia moves as it always has, gray-green and cold, fed by mountains and regulated by dams. The official depth is 40 feet, give or take. The charts say so. The surveys confirm it. But fishermen still report the readings. Boaters still see the numbers climb on their instruments. 200 feet, 210, or 220s before the signal returns to normal. The zone remains uncharted. The questions remain unanswered. Marcus Olerud, now retired, has never spoken publicly about what he saw that day in 1994. But in a letter to a former colleague, obtained years later, he wrote a single line that has circulated quietly among those who study the river's secrets. "I looked down," he wrote, "and the bottom wasn't there." He did not explain what he meant. He did not need to. There are places where even the mountain refuses to speak back. Wind Mountain rises 1,907 feet above the Columbia River on the Washington side of the Gorge, approximately 6 miles west of the town of Home Valley. It is a modest peak by Pacific Northwest standards, a volcanic remnant composed of basalt and andesite, shaped by millions of years of erosion. The summit offers panoramic views of the river, the Oregon shore, and the distant snowcap of Mount Hood. On clear days, hikers can see for 30 miles in every direction. The mountain has been sacred to the indigenous peoples of the region for thousands of years. The Klickitat, Yakima, and Wishram tribes all hold oral traditions concerning the peak. In the Sahaptin language, it was called by a name that roughly translates to the place that listens. Elders warned against shouting there, against speaking certain words aloud, against disturbing whatever it was that dwelt in the silence. Euro-American settlers largely ignored these warnings. The first recorded ascent by non-indigenous climbers occurred in 1874. By the early 20th century, the mountain had become a popular destination for day hikers. A trail was established, improved, and maintained by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. Today, the hike to the summit takes approximately 2 hours and is considered moderately difficult. Most visitors notice nothing unusual. They reach the top, take photographs, eat lunch, and descend. The view is beautiful. The trail is well marked. The experience is unremarkable. But some visitors have reported something different. They say the summit is too quiet. The first formal documentation of the acoustic anomaly appears in the field notes of a biologist named Constance Wilder, who conducted songbird surveys in the Columbia River Gorge during the summer of 1963. Wilder was recording dawn chorus data at various elevations to study how bird vocalizations varied with altitude and habitat. Her methodology was standard: arrive before sunrise, set up recording equipment, and document all avian sounds during the peak activity period. On June 22, 1963, Wilder climbed Wind Mountain to establish a recording station at the summit. Her notes describe arriving at 5:45 in the morning, setting up her equipment, and waiting for the chorus to begin. It never did. No vocalizations recorded, Wilder wrote. Complete silence from 0550 to 0730. Several birds observed in flight. Juncos, thrushes, one red-tailed hawk, but none producing audible sound. Equipment tested and functioning normally. Descended to lower elevation. Normal bird activity resumed at approximately 800 feet below summit. Wilder returned to the summit 3 more times that summer. Each visit produced the same result: observable bird activity with no corresponding sound. On her final visit in August, she conducted a simple test. She clapped her hands at the summit and noted that the sound was muted, as if absorbed by the air itself. She shouted her own name. There was no echo. Her field notes from that day include a single underlined sentence: "The mountain does not reflect sound." Wilder submitted her observations to her supervising professor at the University of Washington. The data was not included in her final report. She completed her degree and left academia in 1968. Her field notebooks were discovered in a university storage facility in 2002. Subsequent visitors have described similar experiences, though most have difficulty articulating exactly what they felt. A retired park ranger named Donald Featherstone, who worked the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest from 1971 to 1996, said he had climbed Wind Mountain probably 50 times during his career. He described the summit as the quietest place I've ever been. "You don't notice it at first," Featherstone said in a 2010 interview. "But after a few minutes, you realize you can't hear anything. Not the wind, not the birds, not even your own breathing, unless you really focus on it. It's like the air up there is heavier, like sound just stops." He said he had mentioned the phenomenon to colleagues over the years, but most dismissed it as subjective impression or altitude-related ear pressure. Featherstone admitted he had no proof, but he also said he had stopped visiting the summit after 1989. "I started to feel like I wasn't supposed to be there," he said, "like I was being listened to." A hiker named Yuki Nishimura, who summited Wind Mountain in August of 2007, posted an account on an outdoor recreation forum describing what she called the strangest silence I've ever experienced. She wrote that she had tried to call out to a friend who was hiking ahead of her, but her voice seemed to die in the air before reaching him. He did not hear her. She repeated his name 3 times. Nothing. "I wasn't scared," Nishimura wrote. "Just confused. I've hiked all over the Cascades, and I've never felt anything like that. It was like the mountain didn't want me to make noise." A linguistics researcher named Dr. Emmanuel Olufemi, who studies Sahaptin and other Plateau Penutian languages, offered a different perspective. In a 2015 article, he noted that several Sahaptin-speaking elders had described Wind Mountain as a place where the wrong words should not be spoken. He found that the warnings were not general prohibitions against noise, but specific cautions against certain phrases, words related to death, departure, and the crossing of thresholds. "The elders I spoke with were very clear," Olufemi wrote. "The mountain hears, and there are things it does not want to hear." In 1991, a team of acoustic researchers from Oregon State University conducted a study of sound propagation at various elevations in the Columbia River Gorge. The project was led by Dr. Helena Kowalski, an expert in environmental acoustics. Her team used calibrated speakers and microphones to measure how sound traveled through different terrain: forests, open meadows, cliff faces, and summit areas. The goal was to understand how landscape features affected noise pollution from highways and industrial sites. Wind Mountain was included as one of 12 study locations. The team climbed to the summit on September 4, 1991, carrying portable equipment. They conducted standard tests, emitting tones at various frequencies and measuring how far the sound traveled before falling below detectable levels. The results at Wind Mountain were anomalous. At most locations, sound attenuation followed predictable patterns based on distance, humidity, and terrain. At Wind Mountain's summit, certain frequencies were absorbed almost entirely, not gradually diminished, but eliminated within a few meters of the source. The affected frequencies ranged from approximately 85 Hz to 260 Hz. This range corresponds closely to the fundamental frequency of adult human speech, the range in which vowels and certain consonants are produced. Dr. Kowalski noted in her unpublished field report that the absorption was highly selective and did not affect frequencies above or below the speech range. She described the phenomenon as acoustically inexplicable and recommended further study. No follow-up was ever conducted. The wind mountain data was excluded from the final published study, which focused on noise mitigation strategies for highway corridors. When contacted by a journalist in 2018, Dr. Kowalski, then retired, said only that the data had been inconclusive and that she had moved on to other projects. Her original field report was never released. A Freedom of Information Act request submitted to Oregon State University in 2019 was denied on the grounds that the materials were personal research notes, not institutional records. Wind Mountain remains a popular hiking destination. The trail is busy on summer weekends. Families climb to the summit, eat sandwiches, and admire the view. Most notice nothing unusual, but a small number of visitors, perhaps 1 in 50, perhaps fewer, report the same experience that Constance Wilder documented more than 60 years ago. The silence, the absence of echo, the sense that sound itself has been removed from the air. Some describe it as peaceful. Others find it deeply unsettling. A few have reported hearing something else in the silence, not a sound exactly, but a pressure, as if the mountain were leaning in to listen. The Sahaptin. Elders who spoke with Dr. Olufemi offered no explanation for the phenomenon. They said only that the mountain had always been that way, and that their ancestors had known to respect it. One elder, a woman named Agnes Whitecloud, told Olufemi something he found difficult to interpret. She said the mountain was not absorbing sound. It was collecting it, storing it, waiting. When he asked what it was waiting for, she did not answer. She simply looked at the mountain and said in English, "It hasn't heard the right word yet." She did not say what the word was. She did not say what would happen when it did. "47 people lived in a place that never existed." Skamania County occupies the southwestern corner of Washington State, bordered by the Columbia River to the south and the volcanic peaks of the Cascade Range to the north. It is one of the least populated counties in Washington, with fewer than 12,000 residents spread across more than 1,600 square miles of mountainous terrain. The landscape is dominated by old-growth forest, alpine meadows, and deep ravines carved by glacial runoff. Much of the land remains roadless. Some of it has never been surveyed. The county was established in 1854, though permanent Euro-American settlement came slowly. Logging operations began in the 1880s, and small communities formed around sawmills and river landings. Many of these settlements were temporary, clusters of cabins and bunkhouses that disappeared when the timber ran out or the mill closed. By the early 20th century, only a handful of towns remained: Stevenson, Carson, North Bonneville. The rest returned to forest. Census records from this period reflect the region's transience. Populations fluctuated wildly from decade to decade. Enumerators traveled by foot and horseback through difficult terrain, often relying on local guides to locate isolated homesteads. Errors were common. Entire families were sometimes missed. Occasionally, names were recorded incorrectly or duplicated across districts. But the 1940 census contains something different. It contains 47 names that should not exist. The discovery was made in 2003 by a genealogist named Ruth Sandoval, who was researching her family's history in the Pacific Northwest. Sandoval had traced one branch of her ancestors to Skamania County in the early 20th century. While reviewing digitized census records at the National Archives, she noticed an entry for a location listed as Harker Valley, a name she did not recognize. The enumeration district corresponded to a remote section of the county near the headwaters of Wind River, approximately 20 miles north of Carson. The 1940 census recorded 47 individuals living in Harker Valley across 11 households. The names were ordinary: Dunlap, Swenson, Fredrickson, Yazzie, Holbrook, Benedetti, O'Malley. The ages ranged from 2 years old to 78. Occupations included farmer, laborer, sawyer, and homemaker. The entries appeared complete and unremarkable. But when Sandoval cross-referenced the names against other records, birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, Social Security applications, military registrations, she found nothing. None of the 47 individuals appeared in any other document. No Dunlaps were born in Skamania County. No Swensons died there. No Fredrickson ever filed a tax return in Washington state. More troubling still, she could find no evidence that Harker Valley had ever existed. She searched topographic maps, land survey records, and Forest Service documentation. The name appeared nowhere. The coordinates listed in the census corresponded to a densely forested slope with no roads, no clearings, and no structures. Satellite imagery showed unbroken tree cover stretching for miles. Sandoval contacted the Skamania County Historical Society to request any materials related to the valley. A volunteer archivist named Leon Strickland responded with a single item: a black and white photograph, undated, showing 47 people standing in a clearing. The photograph was found in an unmarked folder in the Society's collection, with no accompanying documentation. It shows a group of men, women, and children arranged in 3 rough rows facing the camera. They are dressed in clothing consistent with the 1930s or early 1940s: work shirts, denim overalls, cotton dresses. Several of the men wear hats. A few of the children are barefoot. In the background, a forested slope rises toward a ridgeline that matches the terrain near the Wind River headwaters. Ruth Sandoval counted the figures in the photograph. There were 47. Leon Strickland, who had worked at the Historical Society for more than 2 decades, said he had never seen the photograph before. Sandoval's inquiry prompted him to search the archives. He described it as unsettling and noted that the subject's expressions were difficult to read. "They're looking at the camera," Strickland said. "All of them, even the children. It's like they knew the picture was being taken and they wanted to be seen." He could not identify any of the individuals. Neither could longtime county residents he consulted. The photograph bore no photographer's mark, no date stamp, no caption. It simply existed, a record of people who, by all other evidence, had never been there. Sandoval attempted to locate the clearing shown in the photograph. She hiked into the area with a Forest Service map and a GPS unit in the summer of 2004. She found dense second-growth forest, no structures, and no indication that the land had ever been cleared. A retired logger she spoke with in Carson said the area had been too steep and too far for commercial timber operations. No roads had ever been built there. If there was a settlement, he told her, it would have been completely off the grid. No power, no mail, no nothing. People used to do that sometimes. Just disappear into the woods and stay there. Also here. The Census Bureau was contacted in 2005 regarding the Harker Valley enumeration. A records specialist confirmed that the 1940 census for Skamania County had been conducted by a single enumerator, a man named Virgil Tompkins, who was responsible for several remote districts in the region. Tompkins had submitted his completed schedules. In May of 1940, the Harker Valley entries were included without notation or irregularity. Tompkins died in 1963. No personal papers or field notes have been located. His family, contacted by a researcher in 2008, said he rarely spoke about his work and had left no diaries or correspondence. The Census Bureau declined to comment on the validity of the Harker Valley entries. A spokesperson stated that historical records were not subject to retroactive verification and that discrepancies were not uncommon in enumeration districts with difficult terrain. Independent researchers have proposed several theories. Some suggest the entries were fabricated, perhaps by Tompkins himself, to inflate his count and increase his pay, which was based on the number of individuals enumerated. But fabricating 47 names across 11 households would have been unusually elaborate for such a scheme, and it would not explain the photograph. Others have speculated that Harker Valley was a temporary settlement, a logging camp perhaps, or a community of transient workers who arrived and departed without leaving a paper trail. But no contemporary records mention such a settlement, and the census entries describe families with children, not a workforce. A more unsettling theory offered by a historian named Dr. Miriam Ashford in a 2012 article suggests that the entries may be accurate, that 47 people did live in the valley in 1940, but that all records of their existence were subsequently lost or destroyed. Ashford noted that several rural communities in the Pacific Northwest were displaced or abandoned during the 1940s due to dam construction, military land acquisition, and wartime relocations. Documentation of these displacements was often incomplete, but no dam was built near Harker Valley. No military installation was established. No relocation order was issued. The people simply vanished from every record except one. Ruth Sandoval published her findings in a regional genealogy journal in 2006. The article attracted little attention outside a small community of researchers interested in census anomalies. She continued her work for several more years, searching for any trace of the 47 names. She found none. No descendants, no graves, no obituaries, no letters. In 2011, she returned to the Skamania County Historical Society to re-examine the photograph. Leon Strickland retrieved the folder from the archive. It was empty. The photograph was gone. Strickland could not explain its disappearance. No checkout record existed. No staff member recalled handling it. The folder remained, but its contents had vanished. Sandoval requested a search of the entire archive. Nothing was found. Today, the only evidence that the photograph ever existed is Sandoval's written description and a low-resolution scan she made during her original visit. The scan shows 47 figures in a clearing, their faces blurred by age and compression. The background shows trees and a ridgeline. The people stare forward, frozen in time, waiting to be counted. They were counted once, and then they were forgotten. The valley they lived in does not appear on any map. The names they carried do not appear in any record. The photograph that proved they existed is gone, but the census entry remains: 47 people, 11 households, a place called Harker Valley. Written in ink, filed in Washington, and never explained. The needle always points to something that shouldn't be there. Mitchell Point rises approximately 1,200 feet above the Columbia River on the Oregon side of the gorge, roughly 5 miles west of Hood River. The basalt promontory is one of the most distinctive landmarks in the eastern gorge, a sheer cliff face that drops nearly vertically to the river below. In the early 20th century, engineers carved a tunnel through the point as part of the historic Columbia River Highway, creating a series of windows that offered motorists sweeping views of the water and the Washington shore. The tunnel was destroyed in 1966 to make way for Interstate 84. Today, only fragments of the original structure remain. The point itself has been a navigational landmark for centuries. Indigenous peoples of the region used it to mark the transition between the wet western gorge and the drier eastern plateau. Early Euro-American explorers noted its prominence in their journals. Lewis and Clark passed the point in October of 1805 during their westward journey, though their published accounts describe the passage only briefly. The terrain around Mitchell Point is rugged and largely inaccessible. The cliffs are prone to rockfall. The forest above is dense with Douglas fir and Oregon white oak. A trail once connected the point to the historic highway, but it has been closed for decades due to safety concerns. It is not a place people visit casually, but those who do visit sometimes report something strange. Their compasses do not work. The needles spin, freeze, or point in directions that make no sense. And they all point toward the same place, a spot on the cliff face, approximately 400 feet above the river, where the rock forms a shape that no one can quite explain. The first documented account of compass malfunction at Mitchell Point appears in the private journal of a surveyor named Theodore Humboldt, who worked for the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company in 1883. Humboldt was part of a team mapping the route for what would become the Union Pacific Rail line through the Gorge. His assignment was to establish precise bearings for the section between Hood River and Cascade Locks. On September 12, 1883, he recorded the following entry: arrived at Mitchell Point at 0800 hours, attempted to establish bearing toward Cascade Station. Compass needle behaved erratically, spinning counterclockwise for several seconds, then fixing on a point approximately 30 degrees off magnetic north. Repeated observation with second compass. Same result. Both instruments pointing toward the cliff face, toward a formation I had not previously noticed. Relocated 300 yards west. Compasses returned to normal function. Humboldt made a sketch of the formation in his journal. It depicts a roughly rectangular shape in the cliff face, approximately 20 feet high and 10 feet wide. His notes describe it as appearing carved, though no tool marks were visible. The survey continued without further incident. Humboldt's private journal was donated to the Oregon Historical Society by his descendants in 1967. The passage about Mitchell Point was not included in any official survey report. When researchers examined the site in 1982, they found no rectangular formation matching Humboldt's description. Erosion and rockfall had altered the cliff face considerably over the intervening century, but compass malfunctions were still being reported. A retired geology professor named Dr. Ingrid Sorensen conducted informal experiments at Mitchell Point in the summer of 1994. Sorensen had heard about the compass anomaly from a hiking guide who had experienced it while leading a group through the area. Skeptical but curious, she visited the site with 3 different compasses, 2 analog and 1 digital, on 4 separate occasions between June and August. Her findings were consistent. At distances greater than approximately 500 feet from the cliff face, all 3 compasses functioned normally. But as she approached a specific zone, a clearing roughly 150 feet from the base of the point, the instruments began to deviate. The analog compasses behaved as if they were near a strong magnetic source. Sorensen wrote in her unpublished notes, the needles would rotate slowly, sometimes completing full circles, before settling on a bearing approximately 40 degrees east of magnetic north. The digital compass displayed error messages, or gave readings that fluctuated by as much as 90 degrees. She followed the bearing indicated by the malfunctioning compasses. It led her to the base of the cliff, where a narrow gully provided access to a rock face roughly 400 feet above the river. At that location, she found a formation that gave her pause. The rock surface appeared to have linear features, she wrote. Not tool marks, at least not obviously, but the basalt was arranged in a pattern that seemed too regular for natural fracturing. Parallel lines, roughly 6 inches apart, extending vertically for perhaps 15 feet. From certain angles, it almost looked like writing. Sorensen photographed the formation, but the images were inconclusive. The lines were visible in some shots and absent in others, depending on the lighting conditions. She submitted her notes and photographs to a colleague in the geology department at Portland State University. She never received a response. When contacted years later, she said simply, "I don't know what I saw, and I'm not sure anyone wants to find out." The compass anomaly at Mitchell Point has attracted attention from various researchers over the years, though no formal study has ever been published. Magnetic anomalies are not uncommon in volcanic regions. Basalt often contains magnetite and other iron-bearing minerals that can affect compass readings. The Columbia River Gorge, formed by millions of years of volcanic activity and catastrophic flooding, is geologically complex. Localized magnetic variations have been documented throughout the area. But the Mitchell Point anomaly does not fit the typical pattern. A geophysicist named Dr. Samuel Akebe conducted magnetometer surveys of the area in 2001 as part of a broader study of the Gorge's volcanic history. His data showed no significant magnetic anomalies in the vicinity of Mitchell Point. The basalt composition was consistent with other formations in the region. There was no concentration of magnetite or other minerals that would explain the compass behavior. From a geophysical standpoint, there's nothing unusual about the site, Achebe said in a 2005 interview. The rock is ordinary. The magnetic field is ordinary. Whatever people are experiencing with their compasses, it's not being caused by anything I can measure. He declined to speculate on alternative explanations. Historical records offer another puzzle. A researcher named Claudia Brightwater discovered in 2012 that the Lewis and Clark expedition may have encountered the same phenomenon during their passage through the gorge in 1805. She found a reference in a secondary account, a letter written by one of the expedition's enlisted men, Private Joseph Whitehouse, to a relative in Kentucky, describing compass trouble near a great rock point that matches the description of Mitchell Point. The passage does not appear in Whitehouse's official journal, which was edited and published in 1904. The letter itself is held in a private collection and has never been authenticated. If genuine, it would mean the anomaly has been occurring for at least 220 years. Mitchell Point remains largely inaccessible today. The old trail is officially closed. The cliffs are unstable. The interstate runs below, carrying thousands of vehicles that pass without stopping. But hikers still find their way to the site. Some come specifically to test the stories. Others stumble upon the anomaly by accident. A few report nothing unusual. Most report something they cannot explain. The compasses always point to the same place, a spot on the cliff face, 400 feet above the water, where the rock may or may not form a pattern. The pattern may or may not be natural. The lines may or may not be there at all. Those who climb to the formation report different experiences. Some see nothing but ordinary basalt. Others see the parallel lines that Sorensen described. A few claim to have seen something more, shapes that resemble symbols, marks that look deliberate, a surface that feels too smooth. No one has ever documented what the marks mean. No one has ever explained why the compasses point there. No geologist has confirmed the formation's existence. No historian has identified who might have made it. The needle still turns, the cliff still waits, and somewhere in the rock, visible only from certain angles, only in certain light, something may be written. It has never been read. It may never be meant to be. The river glows from somewhere it shouldn't. White Salmon is a small town of approximately 2,400 people perched on a bluff above the Columbia River on the Washington side of the Gorge. It sits roughly 60 miles east of Portland at an elevation where the dry eastern climate begins to overtake the wet forests of the western gorge. The town takes its name from the White Salmon River, a tributary that tumbles down from Mount Adams through a series of waterfalls and narrow canyons before joining the Columbia. The area has been inhabited for thousands of years. The Klickitat and Yakima peoples fished the White Salmon River long before European contact, harvesting salmon during the annual runs that sustained their communities. The Columbia itself was the lifeblood of the region, a highway of trade, a source of food, and a place of deep spiritual significance. The tribes called it Inchiwana, meaning the Great River. Euro-American settlement came in the 1860s, drawn by timber, fertile soil, and the promise of river commerce. The town of White Salmon was incorporated in 1907. Today, it serves as a gateway for tourists visiting the Gorge, and its economy depends largely on orchards, wineries, and outdoor recreation. The river below the town is wide and slow-moving, backed up by the Bonneville Dam approximately 30 miles downstream. Depths in this section average between 40 and 60 feet, depending on seasonal flow and dam operations. The water is cold year-round, rarely exceeding 60 degrees even in summer, and visibility is poor due to suspended sediment from glacial melt. It is not a river where light behaves strangely, but for more than a century, residents have reported seeing something in the water that defies explanation. The first recorded account appears in the diary of a homesteader named Alma Lindgren, who settled near White Salmon in 1891. Lindgren's entry for July 19, 1893, describes an evening spent on the bluff above the river with her husband and 2 children. The family had come to watch the sunset and cool off after a hot day. As darkness fell, Lindgren noticed what she initially took to be lamplight reflected on the water. But the light was not on the surface, she wrote, it was beneath it, moving slowly upstream against the current. There were 3 of them, pale blue, traveling together as if connected. We watched for perhaps 10 minutes. Then they descended, not downstream, but downward, and were gone. Her husband, according to the diary, saw the same thing. He refused to discuss it afterward. The family never returned to that spot. Similar accounts have surfaced at irregular intervals throughout the following decades. A fisherman named Walter Kovalenko reported lights beneath the surface in 1923. A group of teenagers described the phenomenon in 1951. A retired schoolteacher named Beatrice Farnham wrote a letter to the Hood River News in 1968 describing underwater illumination she had observed from the White Salmon Bridge. None of these accounts received official attention. Most were dismissed as reflections, phosphorescence, or imagination, but they share common details. The lights are always described as blue or pale green, always moving upstream, always in groups of 2 to 5, and always descending before they disappear. They do not flicker. They do not fade. They simply go down into water that should be no more than 60 feet deep and vanish. A more detailed observation was recorded in August of 1987 by a commercial fisherman named George Takemura, who operated a gill netting boat on the Columbia for more than 30 years. Takemura was anchored near the mouth of the White Salmon River on the night of August 14th, waiting for the morning salmon run. The sky was clear. The moon was new. The river was unusually calm. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, Takemura noticed a glow beneath his boat. He initially assumed it was bioluminescence, a phenomenon he had encountered occasionally in coastal waters, though rarely in the Columbia. But as he watched, the glow resolved into 3 distinct points of light, each approximately the size of a dinner plate, moving slowly upstream. They were maybe 20 feet down, Takemura later recounted, too deep to be reflections, too steady to be fish. They moved in a triangle formation, keeping perfect distance from each other. I watched them pass under my boat and continue upriver. He followed them with his spotlight for approximately 200 yards. Then, he said, they descended. They went straight down, not drifting, sinking on purpose, like they knew where they were going. My depth finder showed 42 feet at that spot, but the lights kept going. 50 feet, 60, 70. The finder couldn't track them anymore. They just went into the bottom. Takamura reported the incident to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife the following day. The report was filed, but never investigated. He continued fishing the Columbia until his retirement in 2004. He saw the lights twice more, once in 1993 and once in 2001, always in the same general area, always behaving the same way. "I don't know what they are," he said in a 2009 interview, "but I know they're real, and I know they're not supposed to be there." Scientific explanations for underwater lights in freshwater rivers are limited. Bioluminescence is rare in freshwater ecosystems, occurring primarily in certain species of bacteria and fungi that produce faint, diffuse glows rather than concentrated points of light. The Columbia River does not host any known bioluminescent organisms capable of producing the kind of illumination described by witnesses. Phosphorescence, the emission of light absorbed from an external source, is similarly unlikely in the conditions described. The sightings consistently occur on dark nights with no artificial light sources nearby. Some researchers have proposed that the lights could be reflections from submerged debris, metal objects, glass, or other materials capable of catching distant light. But this theory does not account for the movement of the lights, their consistent upstream direction, or their apparent descent into the riverbed. A geologist named Dr. Patricia Halverson, who studied the Columbia River Basin for the United States Geological Survey in the 1990s, offered a different hypothesis. She noted that the gorge sits atop a complex network of basalt formations, some of which contain natural gas pockets and geothermal features. In rare cases, she suggested, gas emissions could interact with minerals in the water to produce brief luminescent effects. But Halverson acknowledged that no such phenomenon had been documented in the Columbia River, and it would not explain the formation patterns, the upstream movement, or the descent. "Frankly," she said in a 2002 interview, "I don't have an explanation. The geology doesn't support it, the chemistry doesn't support it, but people keep seeing them." The Army Corps of Engineers, which manages the Bonneville Dam and monitors conditions throughout the lower Columbia, has no records of light anomalies in the white salmon section. A Freedom of Information Act request submitted in 2014 returned no responsive documents. A spokesperson stated that the Corps does not track visual phenomena unrelated to navigation or dam operations. The lights continue to be reported. An online forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena in the Pacific Northwest has collected more than 40 accounts from the white salmon area since 2006. The descriptions are remarkably consistent: blue or green lights, moving upstream, descending into the riverbed, disappearing without trace. A kayaker named Hector Dominguez posted his account in 2017. He had been paddling near the confluence of the White Salmon and Columbia Rivers at dusk when he noticed a glow beneath his boat. He stopped paddling and watched as 4 lights passed beneath him, moving in a slow, deliberate line. "I tried to follow them," he wrote, "but they went down. I could see them getting smaller, deeper. And then they were gone. The river is maybe 50 feet there. They went past that. I don't know where they went." He did not paddle that section again. The indigenous peoples of the region have their own stories about lights in the water. A Yakima elder named Francis Whitebird, interviewed in 2010, said his grandmother had spoken of the travelers, spirits who moved beneath the river carrying messages between the worlds. She told him never to follow them. She told him the river had places that did not belong to the living. He did not elaborate. He said only that some stories were not meant to be shared. The Columbia flows on. The dam holds the water back. The lights appear on dark nights, moving upstream, descending into depths that should not exist. No one knows what they are. No one knows where they go, and no one has ever followed them all the way down. The instruments recorded weather that hadn't happened yet. Lyle is an unincorporated community on the Washington side of the Columbia River Gorge, approximately 15 miles east of White Salmon. The town sits at the confluence of the Klickitat River and the Columbia, where the dry eastern plateau begins to dominate the landscape. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees. Winter brings ice storms that coat the highway and close the passes. The wind, funneled through the gorge, can reach 60 miles per hour on ordinary days. The area has been monitored for weather since the early 20th century. Agricultural interests, orchards, wheat farms, cattle ranches, depended on accurate forecasting. The Bonneville Power Administration, which managed the dams along the Columbia, needed precipitation data to predict runoff and adjust power generation. By the 1940s, a network of small weather stations dotted the gorge, staffed by part-time observers who recorded temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, wind speed, and precipitation at regular intervals. One of these stations was located on a ridge approximately 3 miles north of Lyle at an elevation of 1,800 feet. The site offered an unobstructed view of the river valley and was considered ideal for capturing the microclimate variations that made gorge weather so unpredictable. The station was established in 1947 and operated continuously until 1971, when it was decommissioned and replaced by automated equipment at a different location. For most of its existence, the Lyle station was staffed by a single observer, a man named Earl Magnuson. Magnuson lived alone in a small cabin adjacent to the station. He took readings 4 times daily, maintained the equipment, and submitted monthly reports to the National Weather Service. His records were considered reliable. His data was incorporated into regional forecasts without question. But in 1958, something changed. The anomaly was discovered in 2004, nearly 30 years after Magnuson's death. His surviving family, a niece named Dorothy Kessler and her son, had inherited the cabin and its contents after Magnuson died in 1976. The property had remained largely untouched, used occasionally as a hunting cabin, but never fully cleared. When Kessler decided to sell the land in 2004, she began sorting through her uncle's belongings. In a locked trunk in the cabin's attic, she found 43 logbooks spanning the years 1947 to 1971. Most were standard weather observation logs, handwritten entries recording temperature, pressure, and precipitation at 6-hour intervals. But the logbooks from 1958 were different. Beginning on March 1st of that year, the entries showed a peculiar pattern. Each day's data appeared to have been recorded twice. Once in Magnuson's usual handwriting and once in a second column labeled simply "Observed." The first column contained readings dated 1 day ahead of the second. The entries in the first column matched the entries in the second column exactly, but they had been written 24 hours earlier. Kessler initially assumed her uncle had made a clerical error, perhaps copying data incorrectly or mislabeling columns. But as she examined the logs more closely, she realized the pattern was consistent. Every day from March 1st through December 31st, 1958, the advance column predicted the following day's weather with complete accuracy. Temperature to the 10th of a degree, barometric pressure to the 100th of an inch. Precipitation measured in fractions. Wind direction recorded to the compass point. 306 days of perfect forecasts written before the weather occurred. Dorothy Kessler was not a scientist. She did not know what to make of the logbooks. She showed them to her son, who suggested they might be valuable to researchers. In early 2005, she contacted the Atmospheric Sciences Department at Washington State University and offered to donate the materials. A graduate student named Michael Ferreira was assigned to review the logs. His initial assessment, contained in an internal memo dated April 2005, described the documents as unusual and recommended further analysis. "The handwriting appears consistent throughout," Ferreira wrote. "There is no evidence of erasure, correction, or overwriting. The advance entries are made in the same ink as the observed entries, suggesting they were not added later. If the dates are accurate, the observer was recording meteorological data approximately 24 hours before the measurements were taken." Ferreira compared the 1958 entries to archived weather data from the National Climatic Data Center. The correlation was exact. Every temperature, every pressure reading, every recorded precipitation event matched the historical record. But the entries in Magnuson's logs preceded the official observations by one full day. Ferreira requested permission to publish a preliminary analysis. The request was denied. His supervisor, a professor named Dr. Helene Voronova, informed him that the university had decided to withhold the materials pending further review. That review has never been completed. The logbooks have never been cataloged in the university's archive. No public acknowledgement of the donation has ever been made. Ferreira left the university in 2007. He declined to discuss the incident when contacted by a journalist in 2016. Dr. Voronova retired in 2012. She did not respond to interview requests. Yes, son. Attempts to investigate the anomaly through other channels have yielded little. The National Weather Service has no record of unusual data from the Lyell station during 1958. Monthly reports submitted by Magnuson during that period show standard observations with no advance column. Either Magnuson maintained two separate sets of records, one official, one private, or the anomalous logs were never shared with the agency. Earl Magnuson himself left few personal documents. He never married. He had no close friends in the community. Neighbors described him as quiet, methodical, and deeply private. A former mail carrier named Russell Beakey, who delivered to the Lyell station from 1962 to 1969, recalled Magnuson as the kind of man who didn't say more than he had to. "He'd take his mail, nod, and go back inside," Beakey said. "I never saw him with visitors, never saw him in town. Just him and his instruments up on that ridge." Beakey also recalled something else. He said Magnuson once asked him, unprompted, whether he believed time moved the same way everywhere. Beakey said he didn't understand the question. Magnuson did not explain. The station itself was demolished in 1983. The site is now part of a private ranch. No equipment remains. No structures survive. The ridge where Magnuson spent 24 years recording the weather is covered in sagebrush and wild grass. A meteorologist named Dr. Anwar Ghazali, who specializes in historical climate data, examined photocopies of several pages from the 1958 logs in 2018. His assessment was cautious. "The data is internally consistent," Ghazali said. "The instruments appear to have been properly calibrated. The readings are plausible for the location and season, but the dating is impossible. You cannot record data before the event occurs." He paused before adding, "unless the event already occurred somewhere in a way we don't understand." Dorothy Kessler died in 2019. Her son inherited the property, including the original logbooks that were never returned by the university. He has not made them public. He has not spoken to researchers. When contacted, he said only that his great-uncle had been a careful man who wrote down what he saw. He did not elaborate on what that meant. The logs remain in private hands. The university remains silent. The weather station that once stood on the ridge above Lyle has been erased from the landscape, but the numbers survive. 306 days of impossible accuracy, written in steady handwriting, dated one day before the sky delivered what the instruments already knew. Earl Magnuson never told anyone what he discovered. He never sought recognition. He simply recorded the data, day after day, watching tomorrow arrive on schedule. He died in 1976, alone in the cabin where he had spent most of his life. The last entry in his personal diary, found alongside the logbooks, contains a single sentence. It stopped in 1959. I don't know why it started. I don't know why it ended. I only know that for 1 year I saw what was coming. He never explained how. He never explained what it meant. And no one has ever been able to answer the question he left behind. If the instruments recorded tomorrow, what were they measuring? Someone walked there before anyone could have. Trout Lake is an unincorporated community in Klickitat County, Washington, nestled at the base of Mount Adams, approximately 20 miles north of the Columbia River Gorge. The area sits within a volcanic landscape shaped by eruptions spanning millions of years. Lava flows from Mount Adams and its predecessors have left behind a terrain of basalt columns, collapsed tubes, and hardened rock fields that stretch for miles through dense conifer forest. The most recent significant eruption in the area occurred approximately 1,000 years ago, though smaller flows and steam vents have been documented more recently. The Klickitat and Yakima peoples, who have lived in the region for countless generations, consider Mount Adams, which they call Pahto, sacred. Their oral traditions speak of the mountain as a living being, and certain areas within its shadow are considered spiritually sensitive. Euro-American settlement began in the 1880s, drawn by timber and the promise of agricultural land in the fertile valleys. The town of Trout Lake was established as a logging hub and supply point for expeditions into the backcountry. Today, it remains small, fewer than 600 permanent residents, and serves primarily as a gateway for hikers, hunters, and those seeking access to the Mount Adams wilderness. The lava beds south of town are not part of any designated park or monument. Much of the land is privately owned or managed by the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The terrain is rugged and difficult to navigate. Hikers who venture off established trails risk injury on the sharp, unstable rock. Few people explore these areas. Fewer still talk about what has been found there. The discovery was made in the spring of 1967 by a geology student named Philip Aronson, who was conducting fieldwork for his master's thesis at the University of Washington. Aronson was studying lava tube formations in the region, documenting the geological history of volcanic flows along the southern flank of Mount Adams. On April 23, 1967, he was surveying a section of collapsed basalt approximately 4 miles southeast of Trout Lake when he noticed something unusual in the exposed rock face. Embedded in the hardened lava were what appeared to be footprints. The impressions were approximately 11 inches long and 4 inches wide. They showed clear toe articulation, a defined arch, and a heel depression consistent with human anatomy. But they also showed something else, a distinct tread pattern with parallel ridges and a crosshatch design near the ball of the foot. The pattern resembled the sole of a modern hiking boot. Aronson photographed the prints and returned to the university. He showed the photographs to his advisor, a professor named Dr. Gunnar Lindstrom, who specialized in volcanic stratigraphy. Lindstrom agreed that the impressions appeared artificial, but cautioned against premature conclusions. Lava can create unusual formations, he said in a later interview. Air pockets, debris inclusions, all sorts of things that might look intentional but aren't. Nonetheless, he agreed to accompany Aronson back to the site for a more thorough examination. What they found prompted Lindstrom to request an official excavation. The university authorized a small dig in June of 1967. A team of 4 researchers spent 3 weeks at the site, carefully exposing additional sections of the rock face. They documented 17 distinct footprints, all showing the same tread pattern, all embedded in basalt that preliminary dating suggested was at least 12,000 years old. Human beings are not believed to have arrived in the Pacific Northwest until approximately 15,000 years ago at the earliest. Footwear with manufactured tread patterns did not exist until the 20th century. The footprints should not have been possible. The excavation team included, in addition to Aronson and Lindstrom, a graduate student named Marion Fujikawa and a field technician named Donald Hightower. All 4 kept personal notes during the project. Only Fujikawa's have survived. Her journal entries describe a site that grew increasingly difficult to explain. "The prints are clearly human," she wrote on June 14th. "Not animal, not natural formation. The tread pattern is too regular, too precise. It matches commercially available boot soles almost exactly. But the rock is old. Dr. Lindstrom estimates 12 to 15,000 years based on the flow stratigraphy. There is no scenario in which this makes sense." She also noted that the prints appeared to form a trail, a line of footsteps moving northeast toward Mount Adams. The spacing was consistent with a walking gait. The depth suggested a person of average weight. "Whoever made these prints was walking calmly," Fujikawa wrote, "not running, not stumbling, just walking, as if they knew exactly where they were going." Hightower, the technician, reportedly became uneasy as the excavation progressed. According to Fujikawa's journal, he began experiencing what he described as time slips, moments where he felt disoriented, uncertain how long he had been working or what time of day it was. He left the project 2 weeks early, citing personal reasons. Lindstrom took extensive photographs of the site. He collected samples of the surrounding basalt for radiometric dating. He prepared a preliminary report recommending further study. Then, in late July, he ordered the site filled back in. No explanation was recorded. The excavation was covered with soil and debris. Markers were removed. Within a month, the location was indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. Satsi. The preliminary report Lindstrom prepared was never published. The samples he collected were never dated. The photographs he took were never submitted to any academic journal. A search of University of Washington archives conducted in 2009 found no record of the 1967 excavation. No field notes, no funding requests, no correspondence. The project, as far as official documentation is concerned, never happened. Philip Aronson completed his master's thesis in 1968. It focused on lava tube morphology and made no mention of the footprints. He left academia shortly afterward and worked as a surveyor in Alaska until his retirement. He died in 2003. His personal papers, including his original photographs, were inherited by a nephew who has declined to make them public. Marion Fujikawa became a high school science teacher in Sacramento. She kept her field journal but never spoke publicly about the excavation. When contacted by a researcher in 2011, she confirmed that the dig had taken place but refused to discuss the findings. "Some things are better left buried," she said. "I mean that literally." Gunnar Lindstrom retired from the University of Washington in 1984. He died in 1997. His widow donated his professional papers to the university library, but the collection contains no materials related to the Trout Lake site. The photographs, however, still exist. A private collector named Sandra Wojciechowski acquired a set of 17 prints at an estate sale in Tacoma in 2014. The images, which she has allowed selected researchers to view but not reproduce, show exactly what Fujikawa described: clear human footprints with modern tread patterns embedded in ancient volcanic rock. Wojciechowski has said the images give her a feeling I can't explain, and that she keeps them locked away most of the time. They're proof of something, she said. I just don't know what. The lava beds south of Trout Lake remain largely unexplored. The terrain is difficult. The land ownership is complicated. No formal survey has been conducted since the 1960s. The site where Aronson first found the footprints has never been relocated. Some researchers believe the coordinates were deliberately obscured. Others suggest that natural processes, erosion, rockfall, vegetation growth, have concealed the location. A geologist named Dr. Ramona Estrada visited the general area in 2017 as part of an unrelated study. She reported finding nothing unusual, though she noted that the terrain was disorienting and that her GPS equipment behaved erratically in certain zones. She also mentioned something else. Near a collapsed lava tube approximately 3 miles from Trout Lake, she saw what she initially took to be animal tracks in a patch of soft ash. But when she looked more closely, she said the tracks appeared to have tread marks. She did not photograph them. She did not investigate further. She left the area that afternoon and did not return. I don't know what I saw, she said later, and I'm not sure I want to. The footprints remain underground, or perhaps they remain unfound, waiting in rock that formed before human beings should have existed, waiting in boots that should not have been invented for another 12,000 years. Someone walked there once. The question is not who. The question is when. There is a door in the rock that no camera has ever captured. Horse Thief Butte rises from the eastern Columbia River Gorge in Klickitat County, Washington, approximately 2 miles east of the small community of Dallasport. The butte is part of Columbia Hills State Park, a 9,000-acre preserve known for its dramatic basalt formations, ancient petroglyphs, and the largest concentration of Native American rock art in the Pacific Northwest. The name refers to the area's history as a crossing point for cattle rustlers and horse thieves who used the rugged terrain to evade pursuit in the late 19th century. The butte itself is a popular destination for rock climbers. Its basalt columns and fractured faces offer routes ranging from beginner to advanced. On weekends, the parking area fills with vehicles bearing out-of-state plates, climbers from Portland, Seattle, and beyond who come to test themselves against the ancient stone. The landscape is stark and beautiful. Sagebrush covers the slopes. Golden eagles circle overhead. The Columbia River winds below, wide and slow, backed up by the John Day Dam 10 miles downstream. In summer, temperatures can exceed 105 degrees. In winter, ice forms in the cracks and crevices, making the routes treacherous. The indigenous peoples of the region, the Yakima, Wishram, and Wasco, have inhabited this land for at least 10,000 years. The petroglyphs at Horse Thief Lake, just south of the Butte, are considered sacred. Some depict Sagaglalal, or She Who Watches, a supernatural being who guards the entrance to the spirit world. The tribes have always known that certain places along the river are not entirely of this world. Horse Thief Butte, some say, is one of them. The first documented report of the door came from a climber named Judith Brennan in September of 1983. Brennan was an experienced mountaineer from Spokane who had visited Horse Thief Butte several times. On the afternoon of September 19th, she was traversing a section of the eastern face, approximately 60 feet above the talus slope, when she noticed something unusual in the rock ahead. It was a door, she said in a statement given to park rangers the following day. A wooden door set into the cliff face, maybe 6 feet tall, dark wood, old with iron hinges and a metal handle. I thought I was hallucinating. Brennan approached the formation and, according to her account, touched it. She described the wood as warm, warmer than the rock around it. She said she heard something on the other side, a sound like breathing, slow and even, like something sleeping. She attempted to photograph the door with a disposable camera she carried in her pack. When the film was developed, the frames showed only bare rock. No door, no hinges, no handle. Brennan returned to the site 3 weeks later with a climbing partner, a man named Eduardo Villarreal. They searched for over 2 hours. They found nothing. The section of cliff where she had seen the door was indistinguishable from the surrounding basalt. Villarreal later said Brennan was shaken but lucid, and that she never wavered in her account. She knew what she saw, he said. She just couldn't prove it. Brennan stopped climbing at Horse Thief Butte after 1984. She declined interview requests for the rest of her life and died in 2016. Her original statement remains in the park's incident files, classified as Unusual Visitor Report. In the years since Brennan's account, at least 14 other climbers have reported similar experiences. A man named Kenneth Trask saw the door in May of 1991. He described it as old, like something from a barn or a cabin, but set perfectly into the rock. He did not touch it. He said he felt a pressure in my chest, like something was watching me. His photographs showed only stone. A couple from Vancouver, British Columbia, Maylin Nakagawa and her husband Thomas, encountered the door in August of 2002. Nakagawa said she saw it first, from a ledge approximately 40 feet away. It was there, clear as day, she said. Thomas couldn't see it. He was looking right at it, and he couldn't see anything. She walked toward it. She said the door became more distinct as she approached. The grain of the wood, the rust on the hinges, a small crack near the bottom where light seemed to leak through from the other side. I reached out to touch it, she said, and then it wasn't there. Not like it faded, just wasn't there anymore. Her husband confirmed that she had appeared to be reaching toward blank rock. He said she stood motionless for several seconds, hand extended, before pulling back. She was pale, he said. She wouldn't talk about it until we were back at the car. A climbing instructor named Darnell Washington reported the door in June of 2011. He was leading a group of 4 students on an introductory route when he noticed a shadow on the cliff face that did not correspond to any visible feature. As he watched, the shadow resolved into the shape of a door, complete with frame, handle, and hinges. I told the students to hold position, Washington said. I climbed toward it. I got within maybe 10 feet, and then I heard something. Breathing. Deep, slow, like something taking its time. I backed off. I didn't want to know what was behind it. He did not tell the students what he had seen. He has not returned to Horse Thief Butte since. Washington State Parks has no official policy regarding reports of the door. A public information officer contacted in 2018 stated that the agency does not track anomalous visual phenomena and that no formal investigation had ever been conducted. The incident files containing Brennan's original statement and subsequent reports are maintained but not indexed or analyzed. Geologists who have studied the butte have found no evidence of unusual formations, cavities, or artificial structures in the cliff face. The basalt is solid. The rock has been in place for approximately 15 million years, since the Columbia River basalt flows covered the region during the Miocene epoch. A structural analysis conducted in 1997 as part of a climbing safety assessment included detailed photographic mapping of the eastern face. No door-shaped formations were documented. No anomalies were noted. Attempts to photograph the door have universally failed. Brennan's disposable camera was the first. Dozens have followed. Digital cameras, film cameras, smartphones, all have produced the same result. The door does not appear in any image. Video recordings show only rock. A paranormal investigator named Susan Farrell visited the site in 2014 with thermal imaging equipment, hoping to detect temperature variations that might correspond to witness descriptions of warmth. Her equipment recorded no anomalies. She did not see the door. "I spent 6 hours on that cliff," Farrell said. "I touched every inch of rock I could reach. Nothing. Either the witnesses are lying or the door chooses who sees it." The Yakama Nation has not issued any public statement regarding the phenomenon, but a cultural liaison named Raymond Whitefeather, speaking informally in 2016, said the butte was a place of crossing in traditional belief, a point where the physical world grew thin. "Our ancestors knew about the door," he said. "They didn't call it that, but they knew there was something there, something that could open." He did not say what lay on the other side. Horse Thief Butte remains a popular climbing destination. Hundreds of visitors scale its routes every year. Most see nothing unusual. Most leave with photographs of basalt and sky, stories of challenging ascents, memories of a beautiful and ancient place. But a few, perhaps 14, perhaps more, have seen something else. A door that exists only in certain light. A surface that feels warm when the rock should be cold. A sound, faint but unmistakable, of something breathing. They cannot photograph it. They cannot prove it. They can only describe what they experienced and wait for someone to believe them. The door, if it exists, does not appear on command. It does not reveal itself to those who search. It shows itself, witnesses say, only when it wants to be seen. And those who have touched it, who have pressed their palms against wood that should not be there, felt warmth that should not exist, heard breath that should not come from solid rock, say the same thing. The door was not locked. They could have opened it. But something told them not to. Something told them that whatever was on the other side was waiting, patient, awake, and that once the door opened, it might not close again.